Every day, customers walked into his shop and saw nothing but old antiques. But every single piece was a memory of the friends he'd outlived. That day, when a customer asked the wrong question, 30 years of silence finally broke. Welcome to The Soldier Stories. Before we begin this powerful tale of hidden sacrifice and silent remembrance, tell me in the comments what city are you watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these voices alive. Thompson Antiques sat on the corner of Maple Street, wedged between a small bakery that smelled of fresh bread and a dry cleaner that had seen better days. The building itself was old, probably from the 1940s, with brick walls that had weathered decades of rain and sun. The wooden sign above the door was hand-painted, the gold letters slightly faded but still readable. The front window displayed the usual collection you'd expect from any antique shop. Vintage pocket watches with intricate engravings, tarnished silver picture frames holding photographs of people long forgotten, delicate china sets with hairline cracks that spoke of family dinners from another era. There were old books with leather bindings, their pages yellowed and brittle, and jewelry boxes that played half-remembered melodies when opened. But the left side of the display was different, completely different. This section was dedicated entirely to military memorabilia, and it wasn't the typical collection you'd find in most antique stores. These weren't mass-produced replicas or common surplus items. Each piece had weight, authenticity, and a story etched into its very fabric. World War II medals hung in neat rows, their ribbons still vibrant despite their age. A purple heart, a bronze star, a silver star, each one carefully mounted and labeled. There were patches from units that had seen action across multiple theaters: Pacific, European, Vietnam, and more recent conflicts that most people preferred not to think about. Uniforms from different eras stood on mannequins, each one pressed and maintained as if ready for inspection. A World War II Army dress uniform, complete with service ribbons, an insignia, a Vietnam-era Marine dress blue uniform with a distinctive red stripe down the leg, a more modern Army combat uniform, the digital camouflage pattern still crisp. Helmets from various conflicts sat on glass shelves, a steel pot from World War II, painted with a medical cross, a Vietnam-era M1 with a peace symbol drawn in faded marker on one side, a modern Kevlar helmet with night vision mount brackets. But it was the smaller items that caught the attention of those who knew what to look for. Dog tags on their original chains, some still bearing the blood type and religious preference of their original owners, combat knives with worn grips, their blades showing the patina of use, field radios from the Vietnam era, their cases scarred and dented, a set of jump wings, the silver tarnished but the design still sharp. Each item was labeled with a small handwritten card, not just the usual circa 1943 or Vietnam era, but specific details. Belonged to Sergeant Michael Torres, 101st Airborne, Kia, Vietnam, 1968, Captain James Mitchell, 2nd Infantry Division, Mia Correa, 1951, Kurt Porau, David G. Jackson, 1st Marine Division, wounded Guadalcanal, 1942. The man behind the counter was in his early 70s, though he carried himself with the straight-backed posture of someone much younger. His hair was completely gray now, cut short and neat in a way that suggested old habits die hard. His clothes were simple khaki pants, a plain button-down shirt, comfortable shoes that had been resold more than once. His name was William Thompson, though most customers just called him Mr. Thompson. He'd owned the shop for nearly 30 years, having bought it with his military pension and savings when he retired. He was polite to customers, knowledgeable about his inventory, and always fair in his pricing. But he rarely spoke about himself, and he never ever talked about where he'd acquired the military items. Mr. Thompson's days followed a routine that hadn't varied much in 3 decades. He arrived at the shop every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., 45 minutes before opening. He'd unlock the heavy wooden door, flip on the lights, and walk slowly through the aisles, checking on his inventory like a shepherd counting his flock. First, he'd visit the military section. He'd adjust the position of a medal here, straighten a uniform there, dust off a helmet or polish a piece of brass. These weren't just cleaning chores, they were moments of remembrance, brief conversations with old friends who couldn't answer back. The ritual was always the same. He'd pick up each dog tag, read the name silently, then place it back exactly where it belonged. Some customers had noticed this habit and assumed he was just being meticulous about his display. They had no idea he was saying good morning to men who'd never made it to their own good mornings. After tending to the military section, he'd move through the rest of the shop. He'd wind the antique clocks, adjust the positioning of furniture, pieces, and update the small handwritten price tags. Everything had to be perfect, not because he was obsessive, but because he understood that every item in his shop had once meant something to someone. At exactly 8:15 a.m., he'd flip the sign on the door from closed to open and take his position behind the counter. He'd pull out a worn paperback book, usually a military history or biography, and settle in for the day. Customers came and went throughout the day. Some were serious collectors looking for specific items. Others were casual browsers killing time on a Saturday afternoon. A few were dealers from other shops, hoping to find something they could resell for a profit. Mr. Thompson treated them all the same. He was polite, helpful, and honest about the condition and provenance of his items. If someone was looking for something he didn't have, he'd often suggest other shops in the area. If a customer couldn't afford something they really wanted, he'd sometimes work out a payment plan. But there were certain items he refused to sell. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Mr. Thompson had completed his morning routine and settled behind the counter with a biography of General Patton when the first customer of the day walked in. He was a young man, probably in his late 20s, wearing expensive jeans and a designer t-shirt. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no about anything important. His name was Brandon, and he collected military memorabilia as a hobby. Brandon went straight to the military section, his eyes scanning the displays like a predator searching for prey. He stopped in front of the Vietnam-era items, his attention caught by a set of medals that belonged to a Marine sergeant who'd died at Key Sap. "These Vietnam medals," Brandon said, not bothering with pleasantries. "What's your best price?" Mr. Thompson looked up from his book. "They're marked fairly. Come on, everything's negotiable. I can get similar items online for half that price." "Then I suggest you do that." Brandon frowned. He wasn't used to merchants who didn't jump at the chance to make a sale. "Look, I'm a serious collector. I could become a regular customer if you're willing to work with me on pricing." Mr. Thompson closed his book and stood up slowly. He walked over to where Brandon was standing and looked at the medals in question. For a moment, his expression softened, as if he was seeing something other than the bronze and ribbon. "Sergeant Martinez," he said quietly, 22 years old. "Had a baby daughter he never got to meet." "Yeah, that's nice," Brandon said dismissively. "But about the price, ... They're not for sale." Brandon blinked. "What do you mean?" "They're in your display case. Some things are for display only." "That's ridiculous. This is a business, not a museum." Mr. Thompson turned and walked back to his counter without another word. Brandon stood there for a moment, confused and irritated, then left the shop muttering about crazy old men. About an hour later, a college student named Sarah entered the shop. She was working on a history project about the Vietnam War and needed authentic materials for her presentation. Unlike Brandon, she approached Mr. Thompson with respect and genuine curiosity. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "I'm doing a research project on the Vietnam War. Do you have any items that might help me understand what the soldiers went through?" Mr. Thompson studied her for a moment. She was young, probably 19 or 20, with earnest eyes and a notebook clutched in her hands. She reminded him of his own daughter at that age. "What kind of project?" he asked. "I'm studying the personal experiences of combat veterans. Not the big political picture, but what it was actually like for the individual soldiers." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. He walked over to the military section and pointed to a combat jacket hanging on one of the mannequins. "This belonged to a young man named Tommy Chen," he said. "He was a medic with the 1st Cavalry Division. See this tear here?" He pointed to a carefully repaired section of fabric, shrapnel from a mortar round. "Tommy kept working on wounded soldiers even after he was hit." Sarah leaned in closer, studying the jacket with new eyes. "Did he survive?" "Yes," Mr. Thompson said. "He came home, became a doctor, saved hundreds of lives in civilian hospitals. But he never talked about the war, not even to his family." "How do you know all this?" Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment. "His family brought me his things when he passed away 5 years ago. They said he'd wanted them preserved somewhere they'd be respected." Sarah spent the next hour in the shop, listening as Mr. Thompson told her about different items and the men who'd carried them. She took careful notes, not just about the objects themselves, but about the stories behind them. When she left, she didn't buy anything, but she thanked Mr. Thompson sincerely for his time. She also promised to mention his shop in the acknowledgments section of her paper. The day took a different turn when Marcus Wellington walked into the shop just after lunch. Marcus was a successful businessman in his late 40s, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and drove luxury cars. He'd made his fortune in real estate development and had recently developed an interest in military collectibles. Not because he had any connection to the military. He'd avoided service through college deferments and family connections, but because military items were hot in collector circles and he saw them as investments, he strode into Thompson Antiques. Like he owned the place, his designer shoes clicking on the wooden floor. He barely glanced at the civilian antiques, heading straight for the military section. "Interesting collection," he said, his tone carrying the subtle condescension that successful people often use when addressing those they consider beneath them. "You've got some valuable pieces here." Mr. Thompson looked up from his book but didn't respond immediately. Marcus continued his examination, picking up items without asking permission, turning them over in his hands like he was inspecting produce. "At a grocery store, this World War II helmet," he said, hefting it in his hands. "What kind of provenance do you have?" "Documentation, photos. It speaks for itself," Mr. Thompson replied quietly. Marcus laughed. That's not how serious collecting works, old man. Without proper documentation, this stuff is just expensive junk. He set the helmet down carelessly and moved to the uniform display. Now this Vietnam era stuff, there's a market for it, but you have to be careful. A lot of fakes out there. Mr. Thompson stood up slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. Marcus picked up a set of dog tags, examining them like jewelry. These look authentic enough. Good patina, right style for the period. You could probably get decent money for them at the right auction. Put them down. Marcus looked up, surprised by the edge in Mr. Thompson's voice. Excuse me, I said put them down. Hey, relax, I'm just looking. I'm a potential customer here. Marcus continued to hold the dog tags, even swinging them slightly on their chain. Though I have to say, your customer service could use some work. Mr. Thompson came around the counter, his movements deliberate and controlled. Those dog tags belonged to Private First Class Danny Morrison, 19 years old, died in a rice paddy outside Da Nang trying to pull his wounded sergeant to safety. Marcus shrugged. Yeah, that's a nice story, but did you ever serve yourself? Because honestly, you seem more like someone who just collects this stuff for the money. The shop went completely quiet. Even the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause between ticks. Did I serve? Mr. Thompson repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He walked slowly to the counter and pulled out an old wooden box from underneath. His hands, which had been steady all morning, trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a collection of items that clearly weren't for sale. Photographs, faded and creased from handling. Letters in worn envelopes. Military documents with official seals. Mr. Thompson picked up a photograph and held it out to Marcus. It was a black and white image of 8 young men in military fatigues, their arms around each other's shoulders. They were dirty, exhausted, but smiling with the camaraderie that only shared hardship can create. This picture was taken outside Kisan in 1968, Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady now. 8 men from different backgrounds, different states, different dreams. But for 13 months, we were brothers. Marcus looked at the photograph, then at Mr. Thompson's face. The resemblance was unmistakable. The young soldier in the center of the photograph was clearly a much younger version of the man standing before him. Of these 8 men, Mr. Thompson continued, only 2 made it home alive. I was one of them. He reached into the box again and pulled out another photograph. This one showed a medal ceremony, with a much younger Mr. Thompson in dress uniform receiving a medal from a General Bronze Star with V device, he said quietly, for actions during the siege of Kisan. Not that it matters much. Marcus stared at the photographs, his confident demeanor cracking slightly. Mr. Thompson pulled out more items from the box, a purple heart in its original case, a combat infantry badge, a set of jump wings, letters of commendation signed by officers whose names Marcus recognized from history books. Every item in this shop, Mr. Thompson said, every medal, every uniform, every piece of equipment, they all have stories. They all belong to someone's son, someone's father, someone's brother. They're not investments or collectibles, they're memories. He pointed to different items around the military section. That World War II helmet, it belonged to my father in Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, all the way to Germany. That Marine dress uniform, my best friend from high school, killed on his second tour in Vietnam, 3 weeks before he was supposed to rotate home. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Thompson continued, this isn't a hobby for me. This isn't a business venture. When families lose someone who served, they bring me their things because they know I'll treat them with respect, because I understand what they meant. He walked over to a display case and pointed to a set of dog tags. These belonged to Corporal James Mitchell, 21 years old, from a small town in Ohio. He wanted to be a teacher when he got home. Instead, he threw himself on a grenade to save his squad. His mother brought me these tags because she couldn't bear to keep them in her house, but she couldn't bear to throw them away either. Mr. Thompson's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. You asked if I ever served. I served for 3 tours. I lost friends. I watched good men die for causes they didn't always understand, in places most people can't pronounce. And when I came home, I never talked about it because some things are too heavy to share. He gestured around the shop. This is how I remember them. This is how I honor them. Every day I come in here and I make sure their stories aren't forgotten. Marcus had gone completely pale. He set the dog tags down carefully on the counter, his hands shaking slightly. I didn't know, he stammered. Of course you didn't, Mr. Thompson replied. You didn't ask. You saw an old man with some military collectibles and assumed I was just another dealer trying to make a profit off other people's sacrifices. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. You want to know the real value of these items, Mr. Thompson asked. It's not what they'll bring at auction. It's the fact that someone cared enough to preserve them. Someone remembered. Marcus stood there for several minutes staring at the photographs and documents spread out on the counter. The confident businessman who had walked into the shop had been replaced by someone who looked smaller, uncertain. I apologize, he said, finally, his voice barely audible. I had no right to speak to you that way. Mr. Thompson began carefully placing the items back in his wooden box. Apology accepted. The things you've shown me, the stories you've told. How do you carry all of that? Mr. Thompson closed the box and looked up at Marcus. The same way any soldier carries their gear. One step at a time, one day at a time. You don't forget, but you keep moving forward. Marcus nodded, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. How could he? He'd never experienced the weight of losing someone in combat, never felt the survivor's guilt that came with making it home when others didn't. Is there anything I can do? Marcus asked. Some way to make up for my disrespect? Mr. Thompson considered this for a moment. Tell people, he said finally. When you see someone serving, or someone who has served, remember that they're carrying more than you can see. Treat them accordingly. Marcus nodded again, more firmly this time. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Mr. Thompson, yes, thank you for your service, and for ... this lesson. After Marcus left, Mr. Thompson stood alone in his shop, surrounded by the memories of men who would never grow old. He looked around at the displays, at the careful arrangements he maintained every day, and felt the familiar weight of remembrance settle on his shoulders. It wasn't a burden, exactly. It was more like a responsibility, a promise he'd made to friends who couldn't speak for themselves anymore. As closing time approached, Mr. Thompson went through his evening routine. He checked the locks on the display cases, turned off the lights in sections, and prepared the cash register for the next day. But before leaving, he always spent a few minutes in the military section. He stood in front of the photograph of his squad, the 8 young men who had faced hell together in a place most Americans preferred to forget. He remembered each of their names, their faces, their dreams for the future that most of them would never see. Another day, guys, he whispered to the photograph. Still here, still remembering. He thought about the customers who would come in that day. Brandon, who saw only dollar signs and investment opportunities. Sarah, who genuinely wanted to understand and honor the experiences of veterans. And Marcus, who would learn something important about respect and remembrance. Mr. Thompson knew that tomorrow would bring more customers, more opportunities to share the stories of the men whose belongings he protected. Some would understand, others wouldn't, but he would keep doing it anyway, because that's what soldiers do. They complete their mission, regardless of the obstacles. He turned off the last light and locked the door behind him. Outside, Maple Street was quiet. The other shops already closed for the day. Mr. Thompson walked slowly to his car, his steps measured and deliberate at home. He would heat up a simple dinner, watch the evening news, and read for a while before bed. The same routine he'd followed for 30 years, but he wouldn't sleep immediately. First, he would spend a few minutes looking at another photograph, this one of his wife, who had understood his need to preserve these memories and had supported him until cancer took her 5 years ago. She had been the only person he'd ever really talked to about the war, about the friends he'd lost, about the weight of being one of the survivors. She had listened without judgment, had held him when the nightmares came, had understood why he needed to create this shrine to fallen warriors. Now she was gone too, and Mr. Thompson carried her memory alongside all the others. The next morning, Mr. Thompson arrived at his shop at exactly 7:30 a.m., just as he had every day for 30 years. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and began his daily ritual of checking on his inventory. In the military section, he straightened a medal here, adjusted a uniform there, and said his silent good mornings to old friends. Nothing had changed, but somehow everything felt different. Word had begun to spread in the small collector community about what had happened with Marcus Wellington. Some people were curious, others were respectful, and a few were skeptical. But Mr. Thompson didn't care about any of that. He had never sought recognition or validation for what he was doing. As he stood among the displays, surrounded by the artifacts of service and sacrifice, Mr. Thompson reflected on the conversation with Marcus. He thought about the young businessman's assumption that military memorabilia was just another investment opportunity, and about the larger society that seemed to have forgotten the true cost of freedom. But he also thought about Sarah, the college, a student who had listened with genuine interest and respect, and he remembered the veterans who occasionally stopped by his shop, men and women who understood without explanation why these items needed to be preserved. Those moments made it all worthwhile. Mr. Thompson opened his shop that morning knowing that he would continue his mission for as long as he was able. He would protect these memories, share these stories, and ensure that the sacrifices of his fallen brothers were never forgotten, because that's what survivors do. They remember for those who can't remember for themselves. The antique shop on Maple Street continues to operate today. Though Mr. Thompson is getting older and his steps are a little slower, customers still come and go, some understanding the true value of what they're seeing, others focused only on prices and profit margins. But every morning, without fail, Mr. Thompson arrives at 7:30 a.m. to tend to his collection of memories. Every evening, he says goodnight to friends who died decades ago but live on in the careful preservation of their belongings. He never sought to be a hero, he never wanted recognition or praise. He simply understood that some things are too important to be forgotten, some sacrifices too great to be ignored. In a world that often seems to have a short memory for inconvenient truths, places like Thompson Antiques serve as quiet reminders of the cost of freedom. They are maintained by people who understand that remembrance is not just a duty, but a sacred trust. So the next time you pass an antique shop, or meet a quiet older man who doesn't talk much about himself, remember that there might be more to their story than meets the eye. Behind their silence might be memories too heavy to share, sacrifices too personal to discuss, and a commitment to preserving the stories of those who can no longer tell them, because the true measure of a society is not what it achieves, but what it remembers. And people like Mr. Thompson ensure that we never forget the price that others paid for our freedom. Have you ever met someone like Mr. Thompson? Someone who carried the weight of memory, who preserved the stories of others, who served in silence? Share their name in the comments. Tell us their story. Let us know what city you're watching from. Here at the Soldier Stories, we believe that the most powerful tales are often the quietest ones. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us ensure that stories like this are never forgotten. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember to look closer at the ordinary people around you. They might be carrying extraordinary stories that deserve to be heard.